They said it was shock. That was the word everyone used when they looked at me with tilted heads and careful voices, as if I might shatter if they spoke too loudly. "She's in shock," my sister whispered to a neighbor I barely recognized. "Give her time," my mother said, squeezing my hand like she was afraid I'd drift away. "Poor thing," people murmured, shaking their heads. "She doesn't even seem angry." They were right about one thing. I wasn't angry. Anger requires surprise. And I hadn't been surprised in years. The moment that broke everyone else came later, much later, when my husband's attorney leaned in during mediation and whispered something so quietly I couldn't hear it from across the table. 5 words. Just 5. Whatever they were, they drained the color from my husband's face so fast it was almost frightening. His confident posture collapsed. His fingers tightened around his pen until his knuckles went white. The papers in front of him trembled like leaves in a storm. And me? For the first time in almost 4 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand why that moment mattered, why it felt like justice finally exhaling, you have to understand how I became the woman everyone underestimated. You have to understand how I learned to wait. My name is Marian Cole. I'm 35 years old. And until 97 days ago, I was married to Ethan Cole. 16 years. Longer than most people keep jobs. Longer than some people keep houses. Longer than my patience ever should have lasted. But patience, I learned early on, can be a weapon. I met Ethan when I was 18. I'd finished high school early, not because I was brilliant, but because I was practical and desperate to leave home. I grew up in a house full of noise and opinions, and I wanted something quieter, something mine. So I took the first job I could find that came with a desk and a paycheck, a receptionist position at a mid-size accounting firm downtown. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. The coffee tasted like burnt regret. But it was freedom. Within a year, I was handling client files. By 20, I was managing schedules, reconciling basic accounts, and catching mistakes other people missed because I actually read what crossed my desk. I learned quickly. More importantly, I learned quietly. Ethan noticed me at a networking event hosted by one of the firm's partners. He was 25, confident, loud in the way men are when they haven't yet been humbled by life. He talked about real estate like it was destiny. Talked about vision and scaling and opportunity. Talked about money as if it were already loyal to him. "I just need the right structure," he told me, gesturing with his drink. "Someone who understands details." I smiled and said, "Details are kind of my thing." That was apparently charming. We were married a year later. I was 19. People love romanticizing young marriages. They call it devotion, faith, passion. What they don't call it is what it often is, inexperience. I didn't know what it meant to build a life with someone who expected support but never intended to reciprocate it. Our son, Lucas, was born when I was 21. I kept working part-time, balancing spreadsheets during nap times and answering emails with one hand while rocking a cradle with the other. I contributed to my retirement account, saved what I could. My grandmother, sharp as glass and twice as durable, used to say, "Love is beautiful, but money is oxygen." Never let someone control your air. So I didn't. Not completely. When Ethan's first property deal finally paid off, he came home glowing. "We're doing this," he said. "For real. I need you with me full-time." He framed it as partnership. What it became was unpaid labor. I quit my job and stepped into every role he didn't want to handle. Bookkeeping, vendor coordination, client communication, design staging, marketing logistics, event planning, and still, childcare, meals, schedules, holidays, birthdays. My title was wife. My workload said otherwise. For more than a decade, Ethan's name appeared on awards, plaques, and glossy brochures. Mine appeared on grocery lists and school permission slips. At industry dinners, I was introduced as my better half, which somehow always translated to background furniture. Things changed slowly. So slowly that if you'd asked me when the marriage started cracking, I wouldn't have been able to answer. He stopped asking my opinion. stopped coming home on time, started critiquing things that had never bothered him before, my clothes, my interests, the fact that I didn't want more. Ambition matters, he told me once, scrolling through his phone while I folded laundry. You've kind of plateaued. I looked at him and wondered how someone standing on a platform I'd built could accuse me of standing still. But I didn't argue. Arguing with Ethan was like arguing with fog. You left more confused than when you started. The end came on a Thursday. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. Just efficiently. I was cooking dinner when he asked me to sit down. I want a divorce, he said, voice flat. I've already spoken to an attorney. I waited. I'll take the house, the business, the vehicles. You can keep Lucas. The way he said keep made my stomach twist. Like our son was a consolation prize. Like he was doing me a favor. I remember staring at the table and thinking how absurd it was that something so final was being discussed next to a jar of salt. I nodded. Everyone thought that was shock. It wasn't. It was calculation. What Ethan didn't know, what no one knew, was that 3 years earlier, I had discovered something buried deep inside the financial records he never bothered to review himself. Something that changed everything. And instead of confronting him, instead of panicking, instead of saving him, I prepared. But that part comes later. For now, all anyone could see was a woman losing everything. And that was exactly what I wanted them to see. If divorce had a smell, I'm convinced it would be cardboard and dust. That faint, dry scent that clings to half-taped boxes and old closets. The smell of a life being dismantled by people who don't bother asking what you want to keep. Within 48 hours of Ethan announcing he wanted out, the house stopped feeling like mine. Not officially, not legally, but emotionally, I was already a guest. He moved my clothes first. Not all of them, just enough to make a point. 1 drawer in the hall closet, 2 shelves in the guest room wardrobe. That should be plenty for now, he said, like we were negotiating storage space instead of dissolving a marriage. I didn't argue. Arguing would have told him I still believed this was a misunderstanding. I didn't. The paperwork came fast. Too fast. Draft agreements. Asset outlines. Proposed timelines. Ethan slid documents across the kitchen island like a man finalizing a business deal, not ending 16 years with the mother of his child. I want this to be smooth, he said. No drama. Translation. Don't inconvenience me. I nodded. Sign nothing. Asked no questions. Again shock, they assumed. The third day, his mother arrived. Judith Cole was a woman who had mastered the art of polite cruelty. Perfect posture. Immaculate lipstick. A voice that could deliver insults wrapped in sympathy. She brought muffins. Blueberry. A peace offering, apparently. Oh, Marianne, she sighed, touching my arm. I was so sad to hear. But marriages take work, dear. Men need encouragement. Appreciation. She glanced around the kitchen, my kitchen, as if evaluating my performance retroactively. I suppose sometimes women forget that. I wondered if she'd practiced that line in the car. She stayed for 2 hours. In that time, she managed to suggest I hadn't tried hard enough, hint that Ethan had felt lonely, and remind me, casually, that anything of value technically belonged to her son. Just until everything is settled, she added sweetly. I thanked her for the muffins. I didn't eat them. By the end of the first week, Ethan had officially claimed the master bedroom. I slept in the guest room, surrounded by mismatched furniture and wedding gifts we'd never liked enough to use. Lucas noticed. Kids always do. Why are you in here? He asked one night, standing in the doorway in his socks. Just for a little while, I said. Sometimes grown-ups need space. He nodded slowly. Didn't look convinced. 2 weeks later, she appeared. Her name was Kayla Reed, 26. Worked in communications for Ethan's company, which I later learned meant she answered emails I used to write and attended meetings I used to schedule. She was tall, lean, polished in that effortless way that suggested she'd never had to budget grocery money. She walked into my kitchen without hesitation, smiled at me like we were acquaintances. Oh. Hi, she said brightly. Ethan said it was okay if I made a smoothie. She was wearing my apron. Not intentionally cruel, just oblivious. That somehow made it worse. Ethan leaned against the counter behind her, arm draped casually around her waist. "This is Kayla," he said. "She's been a huge support." Support. The word landed like a slap. I watched her open cabinets she hadn't earned the right to open. Watched her rearrange fruit in my refrigerator. Watched her exist comfortably in a space that had taken me 16 years to build. I smiled. Shock, remember? From that point on, the erasure became systematic. My credit card was canceled. "We should separate finances," Ethan said reasonably. The joint card followed. Then the suggestion that maybe it would be easier if Lucas and I found somewhere else to stay while things were finalized. Judith returned, this time to help. Help meant standing over me as I packed while she commented on what was worth keeping. "Those shoes are outdated. That necklace was a gift from Ethan. Oh, this recipe box. Wasn't this my mother's originally?" She packed my belongings in black garbage bags. Not boxes. Garbage bags. Lucas watched silently from the hallway. Something in his face changed that day. Through all of it, I had one person I believed was on my side. Rachel Moore. We'd been friends since college. 20 years of shared secrets, shared babysitting, shared complaints about men who thought they were smarter than they were. She was the first person I called after Ethan's announcement. She brought wine. Listened. Let me cry. "She's awful," she said about Kayla. "You deserve so much better. He'll regret this." She checked in constantly. Too constantly in hindsight. Because strange things started happening. I'd mentioned to Rachel that I was considering asking for partial ownership of the house. The next day, Ethan would casually mention that the house was never really mine anyway. I'd tell Rachel I was looking at apartments near Lucas's school. Ethan would comment unprompted, that area was way out of my budget. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Divorce does that to you. Then I remembered how Rachel used to look at Ethan. How she laughed too hard at his jokes. How she always asked how he was before asking about me. How she once said, if I'd met him first, the pieces clicked together with a quiet finality. Rachel wasn't my support. She was my leak. Meanwhile, Ethan worked diligently on Lucas. Not aggressively. Carefully. "I just want everyone happy," he'd say within earshot. "Your mom is having a hard time letting go." I'm trying to be fair. Lucas grew quieter around me, less affectionate. Not angry, confused. That hurt more than anything else. I could lose money. I could lose property. But losing my son's trust? That terrified me. That was when I hired Clara Mendoza, 54, divorce attorney. Known for two things, precision and a complete lack of sentimentality. She reviewed my situation in silence. Then she said, "You're entitled to half of everything." I met her gaze. "What if I don't want it?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" I said carefully, "what if I want him to have exactly what he's asking for?" She studied me like I'd just spoken in code. At that moment, she thought I was broken. She didn't know I was waiting. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with Lucas. 2nd floor. No elevator. Beige walls. Boxes stacked everywhere. It felt temporary. Not in a sad way. In a strategic way. Ethan, meanwhile, posted photos online. New beginnings. Fresh energy. Grateful. Judith commented hearts and prayer emojis. Rachel liked every post. That was when people stopped paying attention to me. They assumed I was done. And that was the biggest mistake they could have made. Because 3 years earlier, long before Kayla, long before divorce, I had found something Ethan never realized I'd see. And while everyone else watched him celebrate, I quietly reviewed the numbers. And waited. The truth didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with a confession or a dramatic argument or a midnight phone call. It arrived quietly, disguised as a routine task on an ordinary Tuesday night. Ethan was working late. Again. By then, that phrase meant very little. It could mean a client dinner. It could mean drinks. It could mean nothing at all. Lucas was asleep. The house was silent except for the hum of the dishwasher and the ticking clock above the stove. I sat at the dining table with my laptop, reconciling monthly accounts like I'd done hundreds of times before. This was my domain. Not the business meetings. Not the press photos. Not the speeches. The spreadsheets. And spreadsheets don't lie. At first, it was something small. A transfer I didn't recognize. $10,000 moving from the operating account into an external account with a generic label. I frowned, assuming it was a temporary holding account or a vendor escrow. Then I saw another. And another. Same destination. Different dates. A pattern. I pulled bank statements going back 6 months. Then 12. Then 24. The further back I went, the colder I felt. Money was flowing out constantly, quietly, into places that never appeared on our official reports. I stayed up past midnight. Then past 1. By 3 in the morning, the dining table was covered in printed statements, notes scribbled in pen, highlighter marks bleeding through paper. That was when I found the first mortgage document. Not the original one. The second. Taken out 4 years earlier. $360,000. My heart started pounding. I searched deeper. There was a third mortgage. Taken out 18 months after the second. Another $340,000. I stared at the numbers, my mind refusing to accept what they meant. We had always talked about the house like it was secure. Paid down. Stable. A symbol of success. But the numbers didn't care about stories. Total owed, just over $1 million. Estimated value of the house, $870,000. We were underwater. Deeply. My hands shook as I moved to the business accounts. Lines of credit, maxed. Outstanding vendor balances, ignored. Tax notices, unpaid. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. By dawn, I had a rough total. Nearly $2 million in debt. Against assets that barely reached 1.6. The empire wasn't thriving. It was collapsing. And Ethan was pretending it wasn't happening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a mug of cold coffee and stared out the window as the sky lightened. My first instinct was fury. The kind that tightens your chest and makes your vision blur. How could he do this? To us. To Lucas. My second instinct was fear. Because debt like that doesn't stay contained. It spreads. And my third instinct, quiet, deliberate, unmistakable, was clarity. I finally understood Ethan. Not the man he pretended to be. The man he actually was. Ethan didn't build things. He borrowed them. Borrowed money. Borrowed confidence. Borrowed time. He wasn't investing. He was stalling. And the worst part? He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. He genuinely believed something would come along to fix it. Another deal. Another loan. Another distraction. Men like Ethan don't confront consequences. They outrun them. Until they can't. I thought about confronting him. About laying the documents out on the table and demanding answers. But I'd lived with him long enough to know how that conversation would go. He'd deny. Then minimize. Then deflect. He'd accuse me of misunderstanding the numbers. Of panicking. Of not seeing the bigger picture. And if he knew I understood the full extent of the situation, he would act. Not responsibly. Protectively. He would try to shield himself. And that meant one thing. He would try to access the only money he couldn't touch. Meaning? Because I had always followed one rule my grandmother drilled into me before I even understood it. Never combine everything. I had an old retirement account from my firm years rolled over untouched. And when my grandmother passed away, she left me a modest inheritance. Nothing flashy. Enough to matter. Enough to protect. And most importantly, kept completely separate. Different bank. Different account. No shared expenses. I had never used it for the household. Never borrowed from it. Never mentioned the exact amount. It wasn't secret. It was mine. And the moment Ethan knew how desperate things were, it wouldn't stay mine. So I didn't confront him. I documented everything. I made copies of every statement, every loan, every mortgage. I encrypted digital files. stored physical copies with my sister, opened a safety deposit box. Then I did something that felt strange at the time but inevitable in hindsight. I planned for the end. With help from my uncle, a retired financial planner, I created a trust. Irrevocable. In Lucas's name. My retirement account went in. My inheritance followed. I was not the beneficiary. Ethan wasn't even mentioned. It was airtight. Once it was done, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. For the next 3 years, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the supportive wife. Attending events.
Hosting dinners.
Smiling for photos. Underneath, I watched the numbers. Watched the debt grow. Watched Ethan make reckless choices with borrowed money. Crypto investments. Luxury expenses billed to the business. A rental apartment I never saw. I waited. Because I knew how this would end. Men like Ethan don't leave quietly. They leave arrogantly. And when they do, they demand everything. So when he finally sat me down at the kitchen table and asked for the house, the business, the cars, I almost laughed. He wasn't asking for assets. He was asking for a burden.
He just didn't know it yet.
There's a strange power in letting people believe they've already beaten you. Once Ethan decided I was finished, emotionally, financially, strategically, he stopped being careful. And when people stop being careful, they reveal everything. I learned that lesson long before the divorce. Now I was putting it to work. Mediation was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning in March. The room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. Neutral walls. Neutral furniture. Everything designed to dull emotion and speed resolution. Ethan arrived early. He looked relaxed, almost cheerful, like a man closing a deal he knew he'd win. Kayla wasn't allowed inside, but she waited in the lobby anyway. Visible through the glass, scrolling her phone, expensive bag at her feet like a trophy placed on display. Ethan noticed me watching. He smiled. That was the moment I decided to give the performance of my life. I showed up looking exactly how everyone expected a woman in my position to look. Tired. Fragile. Defeated. Minimal makeup. Plain clothes. Hands clasped too tightly in my lap. When I spoke, my voice wavered just enough to sound uncertain. Clara sat beside me, silent and unreadable. She knew the plan. The mediator started with standard language about cooperation and fairness. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "I'm just trying to move forward," he said. "I don't want conflict. I've offered a reasonable settlement." He slid a document across the table. The offer was generous, on the surface. But I wasn't looking at what it gave me. I was looking at what it transferred to him. The house. The business. The vehicles. All of it. Every liability attached. I swallowed visibly. "I don't want to fight," I said softly. "I just want enough to start over." The mediator nodded sympathetically. "How much are you requesting?" I hesitated. Then I named a number so low, it made the mediator blink.
$52,000.
No claim to assets. Shared custody of Lucas. That was it. The silence that followed was delicious. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. He masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. This wasn't what he expected. He'd prepared for battle. I was handing him surrender. "Are you sure?" the mediator asked me gently. "You're entitled to considerably more." I nodded, eyes downcast. "I know. But I don't want to tear everything apart. The business is his life. The house means a lot to him. I just want peace." Ethan looked at me like I was something pitiful, wounded. And that look told me everything I needed to know. He believed he had won. From that moment on, his arrogance bloomed. He agreed immediately. Didn't counter. Didn't negotiate. He signed preliminary agreements with barely a glance. Outside the room, Kayla hugged him like he'd just been promoted. Judith called that evening. "I always knew you weren't a fighter," she said. "It's better this way." I thanked her. Clara waited until I was home before speaking. "That was impressive," she said carefully. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were sabotaging yourself." I smiled. "Just wait." Over the next several weeks, I played my role perfectly. I cried in public, looked uncertain in meetings, agreed to deadlines without protest, Whenever Ethan or his attorney proposed something that moved the process faster, I accepted. The mediator started treating me like a charity case. Ethan started treating me like an afterthought. He told people I gave up. He told people I didn't even try. Judith bragged openly. Rachel reported everything back to him within hours. And with every careless word, every brag, every rushed decision, the net tightened. Ethan bought himself a new watch.
14,000 dollars.
Charged to the business. I saw the transaction that same afternoon. He wore it to the next mediation session, resting his wrist on the table so it caught the light. Kayla took photos of it for social media. Hard work pays off, she captioned one. I wondered if she knew how much interest that watch carried. The house began to change. Kayla redecorated. New furniture arrived. My green kitchen, 3 weeks of careful color testing, was repainted a flat, sterile gray. I watched from the doorway as contractors rolled paint over the walls. No one asked me.
No one needed to.
I was already gone. Behind the scenes, Clara assembled the final document package. The main agreement was simple. I relinquished all claims to marital property. Ethan received everything. Attached was the real weapon. A detailed liability disclosure addendum. Every mortgage. Every loan. Every line of credit. Every obligation. If Ethan wanted the assets, he assumed the debt. Legally.
Personally.
Exclusively. It was all standard. All proper. All devastating. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Ethan's attorney requested a financial review. Clara agreed immediately. But Ethan refused. No audits, he told his lawyer. I know my business. The lawyer pushed back. Strongly. Ethan shut him down. Time mattered more to him than accuracy. Kayla wanted it done. That sealed it. He signed a waiver. Didn't read it. The night before the hearing, Ethan texted me. Thanks for not making this ugly.
I stared at the message.
Then replied, I just want what's best for Lucas. And that was the truth. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. It was the kind of place where time slowed down, where arguments ended not with shouting but with signatures and stamps. I arrived early, as instructed. Clara met me at the entrance, gave a small nod, and handed me a copy of the final agreement. Remember, she said quietly, let him speak first. I didn't need the reminder. I'd waited years for this moment. Ethan arrived 10 minutes later. He looked good. Too good for a man about to lose everything. Tailored suit. Confident stride. The new watch glinting under fluorescent lights. He shook hands with his attorney, Michael Grant, like they were about to celebrate. Kayla hovered in the hallway, pretending not to watch, pretending not to care. Judith sat in the gallery, back straight, lips pursed, already victorious in her mind. I took my seat at the opposite table. Simple navy dress. Hair pulled back.
No ULD.
I looked exactly like a woman who'd already lost. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered promptly at 9. Silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and famously intolerant of nonsense. She reviewed the file, then looked up. Cole versus Cole. Final dissolution hearing. I understand an agreement has been reached. Michael stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client will retain full ownership of the marital residence, the business entities, and associated vehicles. Mrs. Cole receives a cash settlement and shared custody. Judge Brooks turned to Clara. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. Then the judge looked at me. Mrs. Cole, I need to confirm you understand the implications of this agreement. You are relinquishing your claim to significant marital assets. Are you doing so voluntarily? I lowered my eyes. Yes, Your Honor. No one has pressured you? No, a pause. Long enough to make Michael shift in his chair. Very well, Judge Brooks said. Proceed. The clerk distributed the documents. Thick stack. Dense language. Ethan signed quickly, confidently, flipping pages without reading. I signed slowly, deliberately. Each signature felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 3 years. Michael flipped through the completed packet one last time. That's when it happened.
He stopped.
His brow furrowed. He turned a page back, then forward again. I watched his face change. Confusion. Calculation. Alarm. He leaned toward Ethan. "Sir," he whispered, voice barely audible. "We need to discuss something." Ethan waved him off. "Almost done." Michael leaned closer. 5 words. "You're assuming all liabilities." Ethan froze. "What?" Michael pointed to the addendum. "The mortgages, the business debt, the credit lines, all of it." Ethan grabbed the papers. For the first time that morning, he actually read. I watched the color drain from his face as the numbers registered. House, over 1 million owed. Business, hundreds of thousands in outstanding obligations. Vehicles, leased, not owned. Net value, negative. He hadn't won assets. He'd inherited collapse. "This isn't right," Ethan said, standing abruptly. "She hid this." Judge Brooks's voice cut through the room. "Sit down, Mr.
Cole."
Michael cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I advised my client to conduct a financial audit." He declined. He produced the signed waiver. Judge Brooks reviewed it. "You were advised," she said to Ethan. "You declined. You acknowledged the risk." Ethan's hands shook. "I didn't understand. Is that your signature?" the judge asked. "Yes." "Then you understood enough." She turned to me. "Mrs. Cole did not conceal these liabilities. They are attached to assets in your husband's name." She brought the gavel down. "The agreement stands." Ethan looked at me, not with anger, with realization. "You knew," he whispered. "I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, I said calmly. "I knew." The hearing ended. I stood, gathered my things, and walked out without looking back. Behind me, Ethan was arguing with his attorney. Kayla was already gone. Judith sat frozen. Outside, the air felt lighter, cleaner, like breathing after a storm. Within weeks, everything unraveled. Kayla moved out. The house went up for sale, then off the market. The business defaulted. Creditors called, then sued. Ethan started meeting bankruptcy attorneys. Judith stopped answering calls. Rachel stopped calling altogether. Lucas watched and understood. One evening, he hugged me, really hugged me. "You waited," he said. "Yes," I told him. "So you wouldn't pay for his mistakes." 3 months later, Ethan showed up at my apartment. No watch. No confidence. "I didn't mean for this," he said. "You meant every choice," I replied. I closed the door. I painted my kitchen green. Again. And this time, it stayed. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Forwarded from the old house, stamped twice, edges bent like it had been handled and rehung with uncertainty. The return address told me everything before I opened it. I stood at my kitchen counter. My kitchen, small, bright, green again, and let the envelope sit unopened for a long moment. Not fear. Recognition. When I finally slid a finger under the seal, my pulse stayed steady. The notice wasn't new. It was an escalation. Failure to respond. Failure to remit. Failure to cooperate. Payroll taxes. Contractor misclassification. Interest accruing daily. I'd flagged those issues years ago. Ethan told me I worried too much. Said everyone did it this way. Said the system was flexible if you were confident enough. The system, it turned out, didn't care about confidence. I reread the final line. If no response is received within 10 business days, enforcement action will proceed. I turned the envelope over and wrote 4 words. Return to sender. Then I crossed out my old name and wrote my new address neatly, deliberately. I didn't smile. I didn't feel satisfaction. Just relief. The system didn't need me to intervene. It never had. 2 weeks later, Clara called. "Have you seen the filings?" she asked. "No, he's been hit with a federal lien. Business assets frozen." I leaned back in my chair. Lucas was doing homework at the table, humming softly. "Will he be okay?" I asked. Clara paused. "Define okay." I hung up and went back to making dinner. Kayla posted the ring before the ink on Ethan's bankruptcy paperwork was dry. Oval cut. Thin band. Caption full of destiny and gratitude. People congratulated her. I watched from a distance, the way you watch a storm move across water, aware of its power, but no longer in its path. Then the post slowed, then stopped. The story, when it finally reached me, came through a mutual acquaintance who lowered her voice like she was sharing gossip.
They can't close, she said.
The loan was denied. Ethan's credit had collapsed, and Kayla, eager, trusting, had co-signed everything. The car, the apartment. The short-term bridge loan meant to fix things. Fixing things was Ethan's favorite phrase. It never meant repair, only delay. I saw her once, at Lucas's school fundraiser. She stood by the refreshment table, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a second, something flickered across her face. Not hatred, not triumph, understanding. She nodded. I nodded back. That was it.
No confrontation. No apology.
Just two women recognizing the shape of the same mistake, one who escaped it, one who hadn't yet. Judith, on the other hand, unraveled loudly. The lawsuits became public. The bankruptcy filing circulated. Donations she once announced with pride dried up. Board positions quietly reassigned. Her friends, women who had echoed her disdain, suddenly found reasons to be busy. Judith called me once. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Rachel's name disappeared first. Her LinkedIn updated, then vanished. A compliance review, someone said. Unauthorized access. Forwarded emails. Litigation overlap.
No accusations.
Just an ending. I didn't celebrate. I archived the documentation I'd kept. Closed the folder. Some things don't need witnesses. The last thing to fall was the business. What remained of it anyway? A competitor acquired the client list. They needed someone to stabilize the transition. My uncle made the introduction. The consulting fee paid for Lucas's college fund, on top of what was already protected. I worked quietly, efficiently, ethically. The systems ran better in 3 months than they had in 5 years. My name never appeared, but my structure did. Years later, Lucas asked me if I regretted waiting so long to leave. I thought about the nights with spreadsheets.
The trust.
The silence. No, I said. I was building an exit that didn't explode. He nodded, older now, perceptive. I wrote about you, he said, for a scholarship essay. What did you say? That you taught me the difference between holding something and owning it.
He won the scholarship.
I saw Ethan one last time, outside a coffee shop. Older, thinner, watch gone. He started to apologize. I let him finish, then said the only true thing left between us. I didn't win. I just stopped carrying what wasn't mine, and walked away. Marianne never followed Ethan's decline closely. She heard fragments, secondhand updates that arrived already dulled by distance. A missed payment. A job that didn't last. A move that didn't stick. Nothing dramatic enough to feel like revenge. Just the slow gravity of consequences settling into place. Her own life grew quieter, steadier. The kind of stability that doesn't announce itself. Lucas thrived.
School. Friends.
A future that felt open instead of fragile. The trust did what it was meant to do, protect without spectacle. Sometimes, late at night, Marianne thought about the years she spent carrying what wasn't hers. The weight she'd mistaken for partnership. The silence she'd used not as surrender, but as strategy. She didn't regret the waiting. Leaving wasn't an explosion. It was a release. The house she lived in now was smaller. The kitchen walls were green again. The shade she liked. The kind of choice no one argued with. On an ordinary afternoon, folding laundry by the window, Marianne realized something simple and complete. Nothing was chasing her anymore. No debt. No lies. No borrowed future. Just the life she had kept intact by knowing when to let go. She closed the window.